Welcome to Next, brought to you by Content Labs. I'm Zelena Khan, your host, and I'm so excited to bring you season 4 with a brand new set of guests to educate, motivate, and hopefully inspire you in and out of the workplace.
If you've traveled before, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, please be sure to put your oxygen mask on first before helping others. In this episode, we're diving into how, as leaders, we need to develop ourselves first in order to help our teams thrive, which is why we're here with certified leadership coach and president of G3 Life Sciences, Amanda Ryan. If you're looking to improve your leadership or managing a team, then this episode is definitely for you. We cover topics on emotional intelligence, duality in the workplace, the power of being a leader who embraces a diverse team. I mean, I could talk about this topic for hours, but I'm excited for all of you guys to listen to this. So let's jump right in.
We've had episodes touching on diversity, inclusion, women in the workplace, people of color, but I don't think we've ever really touched on some really key concepts before. So the goal here is to do just that, along with probably giving some advice and perhaps even shifting your outlook if we can. So I'd like to welcome Amanda Ryan. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Zelena. Thank you so much for having me. A very great introduction, no pressure, but hopefully we can, it would be great to have some takeaways from this.
Amanda, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are when it comes to your TransPerfect journey, your current role at G3, and then a little bit about what people might not know about you.
So I started at TransPerfect, fresh-faced, straight out of college. I was 22 years old and a solid 15 years ago now. And I really had the opportunity to grow my career throughout that time in the company up until this opportunity shifting over to this joint partner with G3. And, in the last few years, I've really been able to focus a lot on strategy and development and really kind of executive roles on the operational side. But in addition to my kind of TransPerfect career, I am also a certified leadership coach. In the last couple of years, actually during the pandemic, I had the opportunity to take a course on executive and leadership coaching, and it really opened my eyes to a lot of perspectives and things that I both had experienced myself growing a career into leadership, but also that I just didn't even realize having been in it. And so I had this opportunity now to take the experience that I have and this, coaching focus and training that I've been through to really help enable and work with young professionals, especially aspiring leaders, particularly women, in better kind of understanding themselves and their journey and hope that they can learn a little bit from what I've been through in kind of being their best selves, really.
No, that's great. That's great. What made you decide to do that?
So funny enough, I had decided to do it before the pandemic hit. I was kind of in this place. It was 2019. I had been in my career for however many years at that point. And let's be honest, I put a lot of my life into my career. I started in Atlanta, moved to New York City, moved to London. I, for many of those years, was working pretty significant hours. A lot of my personal life was tied into my career, and I have no regrets about any of that. But I just kind of came to this realization that I needed to create a little bit more space in my life to find other things that I was passionate about and to, continue to develop myself, not just professionally, but also personally, because I'm really passionate about helping others and mentoring and doing what I thought was coaching before I learned what coaching really was. And I thought that it would be a really interesting skill to learn to complement me as a manager.
Yeah, for sure. That was, and I mean, look at you using it now, right?
I mean, not only using it now, but I can honestly say I feel like I'm a fundamentally different person for it now, especially living in this world that is navigating this post-pandemic reality of everything that becoming more important to people, leaning into your values, understanding who you are, figuring out, not only your career, but your life. People are thinking about things in different ways, and it's given me a lot of kind of skills and coping mechanism for myself, but also to try to help others.
I think it's also kind of interesting. We go to college, prepare ourselves for the workforce. And then some of us then some of us get a job and then realize that college didn't help us at all. What I'm realizing now in my career, and what you've realized too, is like you have to continue this education, right? Like education doesn't stop with college. So I think before we jump into any of these topics or any of the conversations we're about to have, I think let's just get into emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is most often defined as the ability to perceive, use, understand, manage, and handle emotions. That doesn't say much.
Or
so
it says
Amanda,
a lot.
why don't you? Yeah. Why don't you define emotional intelligence for us?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good definition, but what is important about emotional intelligence is that you kind of can find a way to make it digestible and really hone in on what does that actually mean for you as an individual and the people that you surround yourself with. So I think it is important to look at emotional intelligence from two different lenses. That is the lens of understanding yourself, understanding the function of the emotion that you experience. But once you start to understand that and start to conceptually experience things in a way that you can reflect back and process it, then thinking about, so how can I interact with others, and how can I help others to be able to open up and find ways to connect and build relationships? And in my case, really, how do I get the best out of other people? We all experience emotions all the time. And I mean, the reason that this is so important to me is like, you're not going to meet much more of an emotional person than me, which is okay. And I totally own that. And a lot of my experiences professionally has been going through those motions of being wildly excited, super overwhelmed, crazy frustrated, sad, all of them. But it was really when I started to understand and think about why, what is making me feel the way I feel, so that I can actually use this as a function of action. When I am wildly excited, I'm in my best self. But when I'm super frustrated and overwhelmed and I'm crying and I can't really seem to communicate well with people, I want out of that space. That is not me living my best life. So it started to be about thinking, why do I feel that way? How many steps in do I need to take to figure it out? And what can I do to change that thing, that trigger, or whatever you want to call it, so that I can minimize how often I feel that way?
Yeah. I think the best way I've approached emotional intelligence, aside from the definition, is just understanding that everyone is just different and unique. So, the way I view something is not the same way someone else is going to view something. We're just all made up, we're just all different. And I think that's been a good way for just me to approach it. Let's get into an example of how a manager with emotional intelligence would respond to a situation versus a manager who probably doesn't have the best emotional intelligence.
I think that a big part of having the emotional intelligence is being able to, again, kind of separate the situation from the emotions and put yourself in a position of genuinely and truly and thoughtfully listening to someone. It becomes really challenging when you are caught, for example, in your own head. Like, let's think about a real life example here. So as a manager, perhaps something just went really wrong. Like a client is upset about something, you have some escalations coming in, there was some mistake that happened, you're getting with your team, you're trying to figure out what happened. So you are feeling that pressure. So you as an individual are in that situation where, this is your business. You might have somebody who is expressing frustration or anger directly at you. You're having to compartmentalize that. And now you have to go to a team and find out what happened, what's the reality of the situation. So somebody who struggles with emotional intelligence is now probably so in their head that the conversations that they need to have are already happening in their head. They might be predicting the outcome. They might be assuming somebody did something wrong or assuming something is going to be the case. So by the time they go into that conversation, they're not necessarily listening to what that person has to say and really understanding their point of view and trying to solve problems with them. They already got the answer in their head, and so it comes off as rushed. disingenuine, not really understanding what's happening. Whereas somebody who can take a step back and say, okay, this is stressful. There's a lot going on right now. What are the steps that I need to take? And they can really put the human element ahead and aside from the emotion to say, I really want to hear from you what happened. It is your job as a manager and as a leader to create the space and the environment for somebody to walk you through it, to listen, to understand before formulating your opinions and before jumping ahead to what that end result is.
Yeah, that was a great example that you shared. I think it's a scenario, like while you were describing, I was playing out scenarios that I've probably experienced as an employee and as a manager, right?
When we think about this from the standpoint of leadership and management, which is a lot of the angle that I do come from and the people I work with, it's not just about you being the manager. It's also when you're the employee. It goes back to that whole, what has your experience and your understanding of your experience can do amazing things to help shape how you're going to be as a leader and a manager. If you had asked me 10 years ago, what is emotional intelligence? I would not have been able to tell you, and I certainly didn't have it. And that's part of why this is something I'm so passionate about now, because I was able to recognize, I can look back now at me as an employee and go, yeah, no, I mean, not only the way that I handled those situations, but I can also look at the dynamic between myself and my manager or myself and other managers that I can now understand why that they weren't necessarily the best or healthiest or most productive of relationships, and learn from that to be able to help shape who I am now, but also others.
Back to the example you brought up, which, like I said, I hope everyone's reflecting on that. Can you talk about some of the stereotypes that might be involved too with, men and women, or maybe just like some sort of unconscious bias that's involved?
That is such a good question. And I would say something I've really only started thinking a lot about in the last year, because it's such a good point when you're visualizing people, right? You're visualizing
I'm a very
who is the
visual person.
who is the person that was yelling, who was the angry client, who was the project manager that maybe made a mistake, who was the manager having that. And as I'm saying that and visualizing, when you think of like the angry aggressive, you're thinking of a man. And when you're thinking of the manager who is able to, step aside from the emotions and create the space and not act in frustration, you're probably thinking of a woman, or you're thinking of an employee who is scared and timid. You're also probably thinking of a woman. And I think that's so important, because emotional intelligence knows no gender, no bound. Like it is a human thing, and every human is so different, but it doesn't negate the importance of having the semblance of self-awareness and reflection and acknowledgement of how to navigate yourself and how to deal with other people. I had a situation come up in the week preceding my official promotion where there was some not so great feedback that got delivered about me by another senior manager in the company, to my boss's boss, who sat me down and was really kind of being like, look, this is what I'm hearing about the frustration of working with you. And if I'm hearing that, like, that's a problem. And I like, this is something you need to be able to work through, especially if you're going to be vice president. You've got to be able to find ways to navigate when, again, people are coming from different places. I was so overwhelmed, I just started sobbing. I was sobbing like an absolute nonstop baby. And so much so I could barely get the words out of my mouth to have this conversation. And again, that feedback from that manager, he was like, you have to be able to take feedback. You need to be able to talk about these things. And what I was trying to get out to him was like, I am taking that feedback. And we had to stop the conversation because I just couldn't continue with my emotions in that moment. I had a very candid conversation with that senior manager the next day. I just called him up and said, I received this feedback, and I acknowledged that that was his experience, whether it was my intention or not, whether it's what I felt or not, that didn't matter. That was his experience. And I acknowledged that that was the case and made it really clear that I did not want him to have that experience working with me. And it was really important that I hear directly from him, how can we change this dynamic so that that's not how you feel? Because I think we have the same goal. And in this one conversation, by the end of it, he actually reached back out to that senior manager and was like, hey, I take it back. I kind of misread who she was, and I should have had this conversation, and I am willing to work with her, and I take back that feedback. It's been a lesson for me on like how to have challenging conversations, how to take accountability, even if it wasn't your intention. And still to this day, I may not understand why you felt that way, but I acknowledge it.
Perception, huh?
Perception, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. You brought up that story, and I was like, wow, I think I've done the complete opposite. I was very like stern. I being in business school, it is a male dominated class. Also, I was much younger than a lot of people in my class. I very much tried to, be very, how you put it, stoic, just
masculine.
I didn't want people to see me sweat. I definitely focused on the fact that I was going in as the minority, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So and now I find like I will probably cry if I'm mad, but I don't actually cry if I'm hurt. My team makes fun of my emotions, but
hey, your emotions are your emotions, right?
I think emotions, right, gets a very like the word in business gets a negative connotation. But if you're getting upset at work, which is technically you may be losing control of your emotions or showing emotion more so, they call it passionate, right? And passionate, that just sounds sexier.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great story, Amanda. That was like a really good story. Now I'm like reflecting on mine. Like,
I love that you keep reflecting and mentioning the word reflecting. Reflection is like the single most powerful tool that any of us have in determining our emotional intelligence. Period. Yeah. There's so many resources out there, but like taking the time to revisit your experiences and trying to see it from different perspectives. And like I said, I told that story so many times. I've learned so much from it. It's really only been recently that I've started to take away the emotional side of that story and the fact that I was crying and the idea of the conversation that I had with my manager's manager on him taking me crying as a reflection that I wasn't actually doing what was expected of me, when honestly it was not. It was just, and I can't promise I won't cry tomorrow. And that's really okay, because I know
it's your outlook. Your outlook has changed. You're different.
Exactly. And I can come from that and look back on it and be like, why was I crying? And how do I navigate that?
We started touching on masculine and feminine energies in the workplace. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
I certainly think, like everything else, the pandemic that we're living in has accelerated so many different perspectives, coming a lot from all of us as individuals, just trying to figure out like who we are and what matters to us in life. This idea of really connecting with our values and figuring out our purpose and what that means for our careers, and the reality too that we're in the Great Resignation, as we want to call it that. And that's really a lot of it stemming from people just taking the time to figure out what they want to do and how to spend their time, because they realize time is precious. We want to live lives that we feel valued. We feel like we're doing something with intention. We feel like we're surrounding ourselves with people who are in our corner but helping us be better. And navigating those social relationships, like, we're not in a world anymore that people are going to stand for a manager who is only going to talk to you when you do something wrong, who is going to sit there with the door shut and you don't actually know what they do. This emotional connection, this vulnerability, this, building relationships as leaders and as managers with people is so critical to building careers and navigating this whole job to job, finding purpose solely outside of jobs, and why people make decisions of who they are. There was this really interesting webinar recently that I was able to listen in on that the TransPerfect Working Women group put on internally with a woman who had a consulting group around what she referred to as emotional salary. And it is really fascinating because you think about like your financial salary when you're taking a job, but this idea of emotional salary, of understanding what motivates you, what is important to you, how do you need to get that out of your job? Those are the types of things people are thinking about. So if leaders aren't taking a more open, self-aware, connection, vulnerable human approach, they're automatically going to be missing out on that talent and those opportunities to build careers or even just get people in the door.
Yeah. I think actually we came across an article, I think it was 56% of Gen Z, like they said that they would quit a job if it prevented them from like enjoying their lives, feeling happy at work, things like that. And it's also interesting to see not only, comparing men versus women, but also just like the generations, right? And how, growing up in a pandemic, joining the workforce in a pandemic, how that affects, your life decisions, your outlook. Phil Shaw, our CEO, his management presentation, he likes to start it off with a picture of his office, which is basically one big open room where like 5 people sit in, and it's like transparency, right? And there's so much to learn from that and be around that. It's hard to be what you can't see. So that's like a great thing.
Love it.
To share.
It's hard to be what you can't see. I am going to be taking that.
It's yours.
What I would hate is the idea that there's this notion that other young women have where just because they express an emotion in a moment, especially one that's possibly uncontrollable. And I find crying to be something that like, sometimes you can't stop even if you really, really, really want to. It doesn't matter. It could happen. It's a physiological response. And like you said, creating the safe space to allow it and give the person the chance to navigate within it, and doing things like focusing on emotional intelligence, which I think kind of leads me into something interesting that I heard lately. And it was, in this recent Dare to Lead workshop that I was a part of by the incomparable, Brene Brown. And it was one of a workshop around her work. And it was all around the fact that it is not fear that stops people from doing things, it's shame. And when I think about that idea of women showing emotions and the masculine versus feminine energy and like navigating that, it is a sense of shame that I think women feel around their emotions, especially around men, versus being able to say, sure, I'm emotional, but hey, I get to learn from that probably more than you do. You never show any emotion, so how do you know what your response system is? How do you know what to do from there? So it just, that was so fascinating to me, because I was like, I do think I live this life of limited shame because I just accept that this is the truth.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily something to be shameful of.
Yeah, I think, just thinking about my brown upbringing too, there's all these different parts of your life that make up how you there are all these different parts of your life that make up how you react to a situation, right? Can you talk a little bit about Brene Brown and vulnerability and why it's so important in the workplace?
I think it's what's been interesting for me is like, I think I am, like you, I'm naturally vulnerable person. I just kind of run by the beat of my own drum. I think it's genetic when I think about my family. And I didn't realize, again, until I was going through this journey, that vulnerability it's not just happenstance. It is, it's really kind of a superpower. And the importance of that connection, going back to the example I gave where people, actually you said it, it's like you have to see it to be it. There is, as a manager and as a leader, there is that need to be able to understand who somebody is and what their journey is and what it is that they're doing all the time, to start visualizing yourself in those opportunities. I feel like as managers, we do such a good job of do as I say, not as I do. You, as you said yourself, you're trying to get people to open up to you. You have to show that to get it back so much of the time, because vulnerability is scary for a lot of people. And that's something I have to remind myself as someone that will go tell a perfect stranger on the street my life story. I'm probably not the norm in that sense, but it becomes less scary when you see someone also willing to show that themselves. And you give it and you get it, and you give it and you get it. And that is really such an important, critical aspect of being a manager. If you are truly out there invested in your people, wanting them to do their best, wanting them to succeed and hit the goals that you have, and create career paths so that you're not dealing with this constant churn and burn of turnover.
Yeah, and I think being able to show those qualities, showing that vulnerability, especially being, head first in a lot of the things and a lot of the challenges we tackle, it's important. It's important. You talked about like the stigma of crying, and obviously you had to let go of that. And I'm pretty sure a lot of women, we judge ourselves because of showing the emotion. And then I think it really gets interesting too when, women choose to have families and being a mother, and, then that brings in a whole other set of factors. What do women do? Like, what are some tips or things that you have in mind for women overcoming this fear of not being good enough?
I will say, I think that this is a space I definitely continue to live in. There are some areas that I feel like I've come a lot further than others. I don't have a family. I'm not married. I don't have kids. That had been like a conscious kind of battle, but also a conscious choice that I've made. And I found it quite interesting because there's stigma on both sides, and there is this, if you are building a family, I can't even put myself in the shoes of a woman balancing a career and balancing children and balancing pregnancy and maternity leave and all the things that come through that. But at the same time, for a woman that has none of that, there is also this like stigma around, well, why not? Like, are you prioritizing your career too much? Or, maybe you're not meant to be a mom, or whatever the case may be. Whatever your experience is your experience. That is the truth. It is just your truth. And taking the steps to be able to give yourself the grace to accept that your truth is your truth, then it's no longer about what other people think or feel or do. It's about you being able to live your truth, and whatever that may be, bringing your best self to all of those spaces. So if you are in a situation of being a mom and having to navigate those, and I feel bad kind of giving perspective and thoughts because I am not that, and there's so much more to it. But it is also that element of removing that shame and judgment by just accepting this is who I am and what I am. So let's create some space to figure out how the heck to navigate it. I don't want space in my life to be taken up with other people's judgment or with shame. I need that space to figure out what the heck I'm doing with my life.
I think that's really important. I think we're already having millions of internal conversations with ourselves. Why? Why add the others in there? You're better off just living a life of shamelessness to some degree, right?
When I think about it professionally, for example, this journey I have and being in this headspace now gives me the space to build relationships with people professionally that I had previously unwilling to even try because of that constant fear or shame or disagreement or feeling like I can't control a situation that I want to control. And by just accepting that all I can control are my own thoughts and who I am, and being true to who that is, because I figured it out. I figured out who I am today. Who I am tomorrow might be different, but I know the journey to take it. So the relationship, it's allowed me to change relationships, particularly with men who maybe previously I felt like I couldn't be this or I couldn't be that, or I didn't always see eye to eye and I wasn't sure how to navigate that without being overwhelmed with emotion. And professionally speaking, I believe it's put me in what is the best place professionally I've ever been, with the reach and impact that I can have across multiple companies with a increasingly wider network, having platforms like this to be able to share some of these things. And again, I'm simplifying it in the words, but the journey of taking.
Yeah, you actually, I'm thinking, we're having this conversation, we're both into this stuff, but there are people that are listening that still might not be sold, huh? They're just some people are just, they're stuck in their thoughts, they're stuck in their ways, and that's fine. But I mean, as a manager, what are some of the things that you might be missing out on from not taking the extra step with emotional intelligence in your management style?
Retaining your team. Honestly, the relationships that you forge, just on that basic level of creating a workforce that people want to be a part of. But also, if you can't figure out how to navigate getting the best out of yourself, you can't get the best out of all your people. And that is what management is, right? Like, a manager is really not defined by what they're doing. They're defined by what they have coached, what they have built, what their team is doing. Like, your goals as a manager are generally the compilation efforts of a lot of other people, that it is your responsibility to make sure that they're bringing their best selves. So if everybody kind of approached it with that goal of like, I want to make sure I'm not just getting them to do the job that needs to be done and keeping them from quitting. I want them to be the best version of who they are. I want them to figure it out. And so you're navigating a space that it's hard to be like, oh, I want to put them in a position where they're going to succeed and be able to bring their strength. Well, what are their strengths? What are their values? What motivates them to wake up every day? Asking that question is not going to get the answer. It's really going to take developing a relationship and creating a space and opening your own self up to that for them to learn and grow on their own journey to really be able to articulate what that is.
Do you have any other tips or tricks that you've used personally to with your management style and how you've empowered your employees when it comes to stuff like that?
Coaching can mean a lot of different things. I think a lot of us would call ourselves coaches. We're player coaches. We coach people to be better and so on. But what really makes coaching, executive leadership coaching, what it is it has nothing to do with you. It's all about that other person, which is tough as a manager because we know these people, we know the job, we know the details. It's really tough to be able to not give them the answers or mentor them through. But taking a curious approach and asking genuinely curious questions and shutting the whole world off and just listening to what somebody has to say and let that keep you going. It's amazing how you can start getting people to open up and dig further and further. When all else fails and you don't know what question to ask the question, what else? And if you really want to know and they say something and they're like trying to figure out what is it that's causing an issue right now, or what else, and you're listening and just keep asking the question, what else? Then you're going to keep getting a little bit more that maybe you didn't before because you didn't create the silent space. You moved on and solved the problem. And now you're in the situation where somebody really and think deep about things that are potentially bothering them, or ideas that they have, or solutions or options. And it's just that style of curious-based questioning and genuinely listening with no intent other than just to hear what they have to say. You're not in your head trying to solve the problem. You're not in your head pushing ahead. You just want to hear what they have to say. Even if you don't like what they have to say, you just want to hear it. You can ask them really interesting questions and get people to feel a little bit more comfortable, like opening up a bit more.
We have a word association. We're going to do that in a second. But the last question we had here was, how do you find your tribe if you like your company, but you don't feel like they're allowing you to be your best self?
I think that, Well, first of all, you have to really know what you're looking for out of a company. So when you say you like your company, what did that actually mean? Like, how are they serving you? Again, how are they serving your like emotional salary? Because if they are giving you that, then I feel like that you should have those options. So, whether it is getting involved, in local groups. I know that TransPerfect does a really great job with like different affinity groups, for example, that you can really connect. I mentioned a working women's session that was done, and that gives you a chance to connect to others in that space. Other types of brainstorming or development meetings, being in an office and connecting with others who maybe aren't necessarily in the same role as you, taking advantage of some of those surroundings. I do think it's really important. If you're going to build a career for yourself in an organization, you need to have someone. So if it's not your direct manager, then who else can you build a relationship with as a mentor or the champion or someone to connect with, somebody in HR, somebody in recruitment, whoever that may be. And if you don't have that, and you've navigated and tried, used all your resources and connected with people in different ways, then it's something you need to really think about. Is this the place in the world and career you're looking to develop?
I'm lucky enough to have very emotionally intelligent managers now, but I'm able to appreciate them a lot because I've also had a lot of managers that were not emotionally intelligent, right? What I've done here at TransPerfect is created a culture that I wanted, right, with certain things.
Yep.
If there was no affinity group, we're gonna go start one. If there was no, if there was something missing, I was gonna go find it and I was gonna create it because I had such supportive managers. You ask a question. I think a lot of people don't ask enough questions. Your workplace is not your school, right? You don't have to be afraid of the professor if you needed, if you need an extension or if you need a day off or if you need a mental health day. And I think when you change that perception of what your manager is, you feel like you can actually go speak to them.
Exactly. I know we both come from the same culture with TransPerfect, and I do think that that's something that's so important and so like great about the culture and the ability to create a culture within a culture and the investment that managers have in their people in that sense.
Yeah. And you don't have to be senior. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room to have these conversations too, which I think is really important to note, right?
So true. So true. And it goes both ways too. You also don't have to have it all figured out just because you are senior. And I think that's equally important for people to hear from me. I don't have it all figured out. There are things that are important to me that I don't feel like I'm always getting in my professional career. That thing can change from one day to the next. Like that goes back to that vulnerability. It's very important for us to show people that we do not have it all figured out either.
Okay, so let's do this word association. You ready?
I'm ready. I'll preface this. I'm really bad at quick response things, so I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be.
We just discussed earlier
that it's okay.
Sometimes you charge head first.
Yep.
And sometimes people just like sit for a second. Yep. So maybe you can tap into that sit for a second person. All right, let's go. Women.
Powerful.
Leader.
Vulnerable.
Success.
Ongoing.
Life.
A journey.
Impact.
Say player because I just read the book recently and it's great.
Strength.
Diversity.
That was really good, Amanda. I really hope you join us again.
I'm not gonna lie, my heart is racing. I'm gonna now go and reflect on the emotional reaction to that to figure out why does the word association get my heart up so much.
Amanda, I really hope you make some time for us and join us again. The conversation was great. I hope whoever is listening gains something from this. Also, if you came in with maybe some misconceptions about some of these topics, I hope we were able to change your mind frame and mindset about these things. And I think it was really cool that TransPerfect and G3 can give us a platform to talk about things like this. Well,
I appreciate so much you having me, and it is really awesome to have a platform to talk about this kind of stuff, and it's something that I'm just so passionate about, and I appreciate it. I will come back anytime. And yeah, if anybody is looking to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Great. Yeah, definitely someone to connect with. So
I would love to hear from any of you. I would talk anyone's ear off on these topics, as Zelena clearly knows.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thank you.
There used to be a big stigma around emotions in the workplace, and as we talked about in this episode, that ideal is melting away. Whether you're an employee or a manager, it's important to create a safe space to express yourself, because that's going to influence how you communicate with your team. My biggest takeaway from this conversation is take the time to understand yourself and how you react to things so you can bring your best self to your team and to your job. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. If you want to connect with Amanda and continue this conversation, find her on LinkedIn. And I want to leave you all with a quote from Brene Brown. Let go of who you think you're supposed to be and embrace who you are. Until next time.
If you made it to the end of this episode, thank you for listening. Make sure you hit the like button and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at nextpodcast@transperfect.com or visit our website at nextpodcast.transperfect.com. Support for this podcast comes from TransPerfect, a family of companies providing language and technology solutions for global business.